It was a cold, mist-covered morning in the town of Derby, Connecticut, the kind of quiet, New England town where the rhythm of life followed the church bells and the sound of horses on cobblestone. In 1883, Derby was a community built on trust, faith, and familiarity. Families gathered at the same market stalls each week. Children played along the riverbanks, and everyone knew everyone else, or at least, they thought they did. But on one fateful autumn morning, that fragile sense of peace was shattered. A young woman named Rose Ambler was found lying motionless in a secluded patch of grass just beyond the edge of town. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised, and her lifeless eyes seemed to gaze up toward the sky as if searching for something, or someone, that never came. The discovery sent shockwaves through Derby. Rose wasn't just another local girl. She was someone everyone seemed to know, kind, bright, and deeply loved. To many, the thought that something so horrific could happen in their quiet town felt impossible. Yet here it was, undeniable, grotesque, and real, in a time before advanced forensics, before the comfort of surveillance cameras or reliable witnesses. Rose's death posed a chilling question that still echoes more than a century later. What really happened to Rose Ambler? Was it a random act of violence? A crime of passion? Or something far more sinister? Something buried deep beneath the surface of a town desperate to maintain its good name? Even now, the story of Rose's death feels more like a haunting than a history. The details are sparse, the motives unclear, and the list of possible suspects longer than anyone could have imagined. Yet somehow, the silence around her case speaks louder than any evidence ever could. And perhaps that's what makes this case so haunting. The sense that in a town where everyone was supposed to know each other, no one really knew what was lurking in the dark. To understand the tragedy of Rose Ambler, we must first understand who she was, and what made her story so deeply personal for those who knew her. Rose Ambler was born in 1860. The youngest of 3 children in a working-class family in Derby, Connecticut. Her father, Thomas Ambler, was a skilled mill worker, known for his honesty and gentle nature, while her mother, Mary, was a homemaker devoted to her faith and her children. Rose, by all accounts, was the bright light of the family, cheerful, clever, and deeply kind-hearted. She had a soft, melodic voice that made her popular in her church choir, and she was known for her habit of helping elderly neighbors with chores after Sunday service. Those who knew Rose described her as a dreamer, someone who believed in love, in the promise of a better future, and in the beauty of simple things. She loved reading romance novels, and often spoke about moving to New Haven someday, where she hoped to become a seamstress and open her own little dress shop. But behind her optimism was a quiet sensitivity. Friends later recalled that in the months before her death, Rose seemed distracted, often lost in thought, her normally bright smile fading more quickly than before. She had recently ended a courtship with a young man from town, a local laborer named Frank Wedden, though no one quite knew why. Some said the relationship had become strained. Others whispered that there were arguments. And still others believed Rose had been seeing someone else in secret. Whatever the truth, Rose's final weeks seemed clouded by unease. She began walking home later than usual, sometimes taking longer, quieter routes along the riverbank, something her mother scolded her for more than once. But Derby was a town where danger felt distant. And for a girl like Rose Ambler, no one could have imagined the darkness that was about to unfold, because soon her name would no longer be spoken in church pews, but in whispers. It was the evening of November 10th, 1883, when Rose Ambler was last seen alive. The day had been gray and cold, the kind of Connecticut autumn day where the air carried the scent of damp leaves and smoke from nearby chimneys. Rose had spent most of the afternoon visiting a friend, Clara Bennett, who lived about a mile away on the outskirts of town. Clara later recalled that Rose seemed cheerful but distracted, as if something was quietly troubling her. As dusk settled over Derby, Rose told Clara she should head home before it grew too dark. It was around 5:30 p.m. when she began the walk back, a short journey that should have taken no more than 20 minutes. She was last seen wearing a dark wool dress, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and carrying a small parasol. The road she took home wound through a quiet stretch near the Naugatuck River, bordered by open fields and a line of tall maples that swayed softly in the cold wind. A few townspeople recalled seeing her along the way. One man claimed he greeted her as she passed near the old mill bridge, while another swore he saw her silhouette vanish into the fog that had begun to roll in from the river. But Rose never made it home. When she didn't arrive by evening, her mother assumed she had stayed the night at Clara's house. But when morning came, and there was still no sign of her, panic began to set in. By Sunday afternoon, the town was buzzing with worry. Groups of men searched the roads and riverbanks, calling her name into the mist. Then, on Monday morning, a local farmer made a grim discovery, a shape lying just beyond the edge of his pasture. Hidden beneath the frost-covered grass, it was Rose, and though the details would later blur into rumor and speculation, one thing was certain. Whatever happened on that quiet November evening would change Derby forever. The morning of November 12, 1883, began like any other in Derby, a thin fog curling through the trees, the fields glistening with frost, and the sound of roosters echoing across the valley. But for one farmer, Henry Mott, that morning would mark the end of the town's innocence, as Henry made his way to the far edge of his pasture, just beyond the stone wall that separated his land from the old river road. Something caught his eye, a dark shape half hidden in the grass. At first, he thought it was a bundle of discarded cloth, or perhaps an animal. But as he stepped closer, the truth froze him in place. It was the lifeless body of Rose Ambler. She lay on her back, her shawl tangled around her arms, her face pale beneath a thin layer of frost. Her bonnet was missing, her gloves torn, and her hair, once neatly tied, now scattered across the cold ground. There were bruises on her neck, faint but unmistakable. Someone had taken her life. Henry ran for help, his cries echoing through the fields until neighbors came rushing. Within hours, the area was crowded, townspeople whispering prayers, mothers clutching their children close, and men standing in stunned silence. Rose's parents arrived shortly after. Her mother's wails cut through the morning air, a sound so raw and haunting that even those who didn't know her felt their hearts ache. The sheriff, Eli Barrett, cordoned off the scene as best he could, though by then dozens had already walked too close. Evidence was trampled, footprints obscured, and what little might have offered answers soon became lost to chaos. Word of the dark discovery spread quickly. By evening, every home in Derby had heard the news, and every locked door that night stayed bolted. But even as the town mourned, one chilling truth began to surface. Whoever had done this wasn't a stranger passing through. It had to be someone from Derby itself, and that, perhaps, was the most terrifying realization of all. The investigation into Rose Ambler's death began within hours of her body being discovered. Sheriff Eli Barrett, a seasoned but old-fashioned lawman, took charge of the case. Though the concept of forensic science was still in its infancy, Barrett was determined to find answers, and fast. The murder of a young, well-liked woman in a quiet Connecticut town was not something the people of Derby would forget easily. According to the initial police report, the scene showed signs of a struggle. Rose's parasol was found broken nearby, and there were faint drag marks leading from the road toward where her body lay. Her purse was missing, though her jewelry, a small silver cross around her neck, remained untouched. That small detail convinced Barrett that this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. He also noted the bruising on Rose's neck, suggesting strangulation as the cause of death. But beyond that, there was little to go on. No footprints could be clearly identified, and the cold weather had already hardened the ground, erasing what might have been vital evidence. Over the next several days, the true crime investigation consumed the entire town. Dozens of men volunteered to assist, combing through fields, riverbanks, and wooded trails. Deputies interviewed anyone who might have seen Rose that evening: mill workers, carriage drivers, even children who played near the bridge. Few witnesses reported hearing a woman's cry near the Naugatuck River around dusk, though no one could pinpoint exactly where it came from. Others mentioned seeing a man walking briskly toward town around the same time. Wearing a long dark coat and hat pulled low, it wasn't much. But Sheriff Barrett began forming a theory that Rose may have been lured off the road by someone she knew, someone she trusted. Soon, the sheriff's attention turned to the people closest to her family, her friends, and inevitably, her former suitor, Frank Wedden, because in small towns like Derby, secrets have a way of hiding in plain sight, and the search for truth was only just beginning. As the investigation deepened, the town's initial grief began to turn into suspicion. Derby had become a place of whispered conversations and sideways glances, everyone wondering who among them could be capable of such cruelty. And as the sheriff's suspect investigation expanded, one name surfaced again and again: Frank Wedden, Rose Ambler's former sweetheart. Frank was 26, a laborer at the local mill, and by all accounts, deeply infatuated with Rose. The two had courted for nearly a year before. Rose abruptly ended the relationship just weeks before her death. Friends said she told him she needed space, though others believed she feared his temper. One neighbor claimed she once saw Frank arguing with Rose outside her home, his face red, his voice low but sharp. When questioned, Frank denied seeing Rose on the night she died. But several inconsistencies quickly appeared. A witness reported seeing a man matching his description near the mill bridge, around dusk, the same place Rose was last seen alive. Another woman told police that Frank's coat appeared to have fresh mud on it the following day, though he claimed it was from his work at the mill. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. And then there was something stranger. During a search of the area near the crime scene, investigators found a single glove, small, white, and embroidered with the initials R.A. But more disturbingly, a torn piece of fabric caught on a low branch nearby appeared to match Frank's work shirt. The mysterious clues deepened the divide in town. Half believed Frank was guilty, while others thought he was being framed. As if that weren't enough, rumors began to swirl about another man, Dr. Charles Spaulding, a respected physician known for treating Rose's family. He had allegedly visited Rose in the weeks before her death for reasons that were never made clear. Some said she had confided in him about her troubles. Others suggested something more personal, with no confession and no concrete proof. Sheriff Barrett was left balancing fragile theories and conflicting testimonies. But beneath the surface of this small-town tragedy, one chilling theory was beginning to take shape: that Rose's death was not a moment of madness, but a deliberate act of control and possession. It didn't take long for Rose Ambler's murder to leave the quiet streets of Derby and find its way into the headlines. Within days, the story spread across Connecticut and beyond, carried by the nation's growing network of newspapers. For a time, it seemed everyone was talking about the haunting case in the news, the tragic story of a young woman with a bright future, struck down in the dark. The media coverage was relentless. Papers like the New Haven Register and the Hartford Courant ran daily updates, each one offering more speculation than the last. Some articles painted Rose as an innocent victim of jealous rage. Others hinted at secret romances and hidden letters. A few even claimed that the authorities were closing in on a confession. though no such confession existed. For small-town residents, the attention was both terrifying and intoxicating. Crowds gathered near the Ambler home, desperate for a glimpse of the grieving family or a rumor that hadn't yet made it to print. Reporters questioned neighbors, friends, even the local minister, anyone who might have known something or seemed interesting enough to quote. But as the story spread, truth began to blur with invention. Sensational papers described the crime scene in gruesome detail, turning Rose's death into a kind of public theater. Readers far from Connecticut devoured each new report, treating it like a viral true crime mystery decades before that term existed. In a strange way, Rose Ambler became both victim and symbol, a face on every broadsheet, her name whispered by strangers who never met her. The fascination didn't fade quickly. Her case lingered in print for months, a grim reflection of how the public's curiosity could keep a tragedy alive long after the morning had ended. And as the last headlines faded from the front page, one question remained. Had the press helped bring justice closer, or only pushed it further away? Despite months of relentless questioning, door-to-door interviews, and endless speculation, the cold case mystery of Rose Ambler's death refused to give up its secrets. Detectives had hoped that evidence gathered at the scene, a few footprints, scattered belongings, and the disturbed ground near her body would lead them to her killer. But every clue seemed to fade just as quickly as it appeared. For a brief time, there was talk of a courtroom story in the making. A local man named George Bartlett, who had once shown an interest in Rose, was questioned extensively. Some believed he knew more than he admitted, that perhaps he harbored resentment or heartbreak that turned violent. Yet when the facts were presented, the evidence simply wasn't there. No witnesses, no weapon, no confession, only whispers and theories. Other names surfaced. 2 travelers passing through, men from neighboring towns. Even a stranger rumored to have been seen near the woods the night Rose disappeared. But one by one, each lead fell apart under scrutiny. Without hard proof, the police could do little more than circle the same suspects, hoping someone might slip. No one ever did. As the months turned into years, Rosie's story slowly moved from active investigation to unsolved tragedy. The detectives who once promised answers retired or moved on, their reports gathering dust in the archives of Derby. And while the public's fascination had once burned brightly, even that began to fade by the time a decade had passed. The case of Rose Ambler had become an unresolved case, mentioned only in passing when locals spoke of the town's darker days. The unsolved crime lingered like a ghost, not forgotten, but left in silence. And so, justice for Rose remained out of reach, locked somewhere between truth and time, waiting for someone someday to find what everyone else had missed. More than a century later, the story of Rose Ambler still lingers in quiet corners of Connecticut history, a cold case revisited, whenever someone dares to look back into the shadows of 1883. What began as a simple walk home on a November evening became a mystery that outlasted everyone who once searched for answers. Old newspapers still carry her name in yellowed ink, describing a young woman whose life was stolen before it truly began. For the families who remained, her story became a warning, a reminder that even in the most peaceful towns, safety can vanish in a heartbeat. For historians and true crime enthusiasts, however, Rose's death became something else, a haunting puzzle that refuses to fade. Over the decades, theories have continued to emerge. Some believe Rose fell victim to a passing drifter, someone who slipped through town unnoticed and left before anyone could act. Others are convinced the killer was someone local, perhaps a person she trusted, or even someone she loved. There were rumors of jealous rivals, spurned advances, and secrets buried with time. But like every decade's later mystery, none of it could ever be proven, even today. Digital archives and amateur sleuth forums revisit the story, each trying to solve what law enforcement could not. They pore over grainy photos, faded police reports, and witness statements long forgotten, all hoping that maybe, just maybe, the answer lies hidden between the lines. But after all this time, the truth feels just out of reach, as if the earth itself has chosen to keep her secret. And so, Rose Ambler's name endures, a symbol of innocence lost and justice denied. A century may have passed, yet her story still whispers through time, asking one uncheckable question: who really killed Rose Ambler? And so, even after all these years, Rose Ambler's story remains one of the most haunting true crime mysteries in American history, a quiet tragedy that time has never fully silenced. Her case reminds us how fragile justice can be, and how easily the truth can slip through the cracks of memory and history. Every few years, her name resurfaces in books, in online forums, in hushed conversations between those drawn to forgotten victims and unsolved mysteries. And each time, people return to the same chilling question: who could have done this? Maybe the answer lies buried beneath the soil of Connecticut, or perhaps it disappeared the moment Rose took her final breath. But one thing is certain: her story deserves to be remembered, because behind every cold case, there's not just a mystery, but a life that once was. If you found this story as haunting as we did, consider subscribing and sharing it to help keep these voices from fading into silence. After all, sometimes remembering is the closest thing to justice we have left.